Buenos tardes and namaste to all of you. My first obeisance is to God Almighty, who has inspired me to take up this task. My second obeisance is to the Mahatma, the great soul, whose life enlightens us all from inside out, whose faith and endeavor can be a role model for all of us at all times and in all ages. And my third obeisance is to the Lokatma, to all of you who have joined me today, whose eyes gives me strength. I convey my grateful thanks to Ambassador Anita Nayarji, Embassy of India, Santiago, and Las Condes Municipality in Chile for co-hosting Gandhi Katha, the story of Mahatma Gandhi, during the 150th birth anniversary commemorations, which incidentally is also the 150th birth anniversary of Kasturba Gandhi, his wife. Kasturba Gandhi's sacrifice, suffering, and contribution in making Mohan into the Mahatma and inspiring thousands of women to fight against injustice and racial discrimination in South Africa and in the Indian freedom struggle is extraordinary. I pay my respectful obeisance to the Matru Shakti, to all the women who comprise 50% of the world's population. On October 2nd, the world celebrates the UN International Day of Nonviolence and Gandhi Jayanti. The entire world is remembering Mahatma Gandhi, the apostle of peace and nonviolence. We have an opportunity to remind the humanity of the efficacy of the messages of the Mahatma, the father of our nation. I pay my respects to the leading lights of Chile and convey my warm wishes to the people who have joined me online. We stand in solidarity with you all in our common fight against the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic. Gandhi Katha is based on the ancient Indian oral tradition of Katha or storytelling with hymns and narrations. I have given talks in Gandhi Katha in 94 countries during the commemoration of the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi in the past 2 years. In all the countries, people have great respect and reverence for Mahatma Gandhi. Many people have been inspired by him to take up the cudgels against injustice through nonviolence. Others have followed his environmental credo, and still others have been deeply touched by his simple spiritual life. The humanism of the world's thought leaders are so deeply reflected in Gandhiji's teachings. The new generation is eager to understand more about the greatest man of the last century, who made such a huge impact on humanity and inspired many world leaders such as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Father Desmond Tutu, Father Kunz, Saint Teresa, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Caesar Chavez, George Bernard Shaw, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and many others. Gandhiji used to begin and end his days with prayers. These were prayers from all the religions of the world. Gandhiji's internal core comprised of the essence of all the religions, one that he had acquired from long study and reflection. The devotional poetry of the same poets that he had heard, sung, and absorbed since childhood made up a significant part of the life of his soul. He said that ultimately all the religions point to the same truth of compassion, love, forgiveness, and tolerance, and that everyone must study the essence of all the religions in an attitude of perfect reverence and have friendship and respect for the practitioners of different religions and diverse cultures. All of Gandhiji's friends were from different religions and cultural background from around the world. According to my understanding, Mahatma Gandhi's life was an epic of faith and endeavor. His faith was in truth, the ultimate reality of truth, and he endeavored to attain it through non-violence throughout his life till the very last breath. Gandhiji's adherence to truth, non-violence, and purity of means has inspired me to give Gandhi Katha so that people can put their hearts into understanding Gandhiji's leadership, which was ethical and moral leadership, his simple spiritual life, his revolutionary thoughts, his activism, his actions, his lifelong service to humanity against all forms of injustice, and how he continues to inspire people in all the parts of the globe at all times and in all ages. Perhaps the greatest source of strength for Mahatma Gandhi was in his faith in God. Truth was the deepest and the most complete form of God. The faith gave him the constant awareness that he was to be nothing but an instrument in his hands. He was to go wherever he was led. For him, the guidance of God constituted two things. One, he had to walk on the path enlightened by truth that was available to him in whatever measures and form. Two, he had to constantly gaze inwards and find inspiration through self introspection, self examination, and self purification. This he did by repeated questioning. And that question was, Ko aham? Who am I? What am I? And what is the purpose of my life? This question has been asked in our ancient Indian civilization since the past 5,000 years. The answer came to Mahatma Gandhi that the purpose of life was to serve others. The deeper the faith, the greater was the endeavor for Mahatma Gandhi. He said, Truth is God. Faith in truth led Mahatma Gandhi to two other realizations. If God is omnipresent, then truth is omnipresent too. If each human being were an aspect of God, then each person is capable of being truthful, of being good, and doing good to others. The second realization was that in spite of all the upheavals in the history of humanity, humankind will only progress towards an auspicious direction because truth, that is God, is only interested in the welfare of its creation. His endeavor throughout his life was devoted to the search of that element of truth, to awaken it and nurture it. This is the reason why he could feel oneness with everyone. For most of us, this realization does not set in easily. Because of this understanding of oneness, Gandhiji had no enemies. He did not want to settle any scores with anyone. He did not want to take any revenge. He merely wanted to extend his love, compassion, and respect to everyone. He respected individuals as individuals. And that was one more trait that we see in Gandhiji. William James Will Durant, the American writer, historian, and philosopher, best known for writing the story of civilization, spoke some of the most inspirational words about Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, and I quote, "Not since Buddha has India so revered any man, not since Saint Francis of Assisi has any life known to history been so marked by gentleness, disinterestedness, simplicity of soul, and forgiveness of enemies. We have the astonishing phenomenon of a revolution led by a saint." I will now present Gandhi Katha hymn in Hindi that elaborates on Gandhiji's definition of truth, which is having harmony between thought, words, and deed.
मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर गान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर गान, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, मन वाणी कर्म में सत्य ही तू बोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, जीवन में मंगल के द्वार दे तू खोल, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, ज्ञान कर्म भक्ति का हो सम्यक विधान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर गान, सत्य शिव सुंदर का सुमधुर गान।
Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy was primarily truth centered. Truth was the first and foremost principle in Gandhian philosophy. Gandhiji's life was a continuous series of experiments in truth. He applied his philosophy to his own life through selfless service and to practical social and political service through his non-violent civil disobedience campaign, which he termed as Satyagraha. To understand Gandhiji's thought and philosophy, one must understand him as a whole and not in parts. His thoughts on religion, economics, education, health, society, politics, literature, culture, and so many subjects that he worked on needs to be studied, understood, and adapted according to the context. His life is filled with many kinds of challenges, solutions, and achievements. He used truth as an experiment not only in politics but in his personal life too. For Gandhiji, truth is the relative truth of truthfulness in thought, word, and deed. And the absolute truth is the ultimate reality. The ultimate truth is God and morality. The moral laws and code its basis. Non-violence, far from meaning mere peacefulness or the absence of overt violence, is understood by Gandhiji to denote active love. Gandhiji's non-violence stems from two main points. First, if according to the divine reality, all life is one, then all violence committed towards another is violence towards oneself, towards the collective, whole self, and thus self destructive, and counter to the universal law of life, which is love. Second, Gandhiji believed that non-violence is the most powerful force in existence. Had violence been superior to non-violence, humankind would have long ago succeeded in destroying itself. The human race certainly could not have progressed as far as it has, even if universal justice remains far off the horizon. From both viewpoints, nonviolence or love is regarded as the highest law of humankind. Another aspect that gave him strength was the clarity that he had acquired from years of experiments and reflection on the philosophical content of Satyagraha. He was clear that Satyagraha was based on the principle of Advaita, of non duality. If the same essence of soul encompasses all human beings, it would allow a Satyagrahi to become one with the oppressor. Any failure to touch and reach out to the opponent would be a failure of Satyagrahi and not a shortcoming of the philosophy of Satyagraha. Moreover, with the experience that he had had over the years, he had begun to see love as a very powerful and positive force. The challenge before him was to use this force with effect. The bigger the challenge, the more enthused Gandhiji was by it. He realized that untruth, injustice, oppression, and tyranny last only as long as their victims accept them. The moment one learns to say no to untruth and injustice, their edifice collapses immediately. This was true for the political, the economic, and the social order. Mahatma Gandhi is the greatest apostle of peace and non-violence the world had seen after Buddha and Christ. His notion of peace is focused on tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, oneness, truth force, love force, and soul force. Gandhiji had said that if we have no clarity and no tolerance, we shall never be able to settle our differences amicably and must therefore always submit to the arbitration of a third party. Many of today's conflict management techniques and resolutions have a clear shadow of what and how Gandhiji had seen international issues in his times. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the first half of the 20th century, had called Mahatma Gandhi as the supreme practical leader for change. And he said, and I quote, I believe that Gandhi's views were the most enlightened of all the political men of our times. We should strive to do things in his spirit, not to use violence in fighting for our cause, but by non participating in anything you believe is evil. He had also famously said that generations to come will scarce believe that such a one like this, in flesh and blood, ever walked on this earth. Gandhiji was the conscience keeper of humanity. That his ideas will be an inspiration to us both as individuals and as a society is beyond any doubt. He was an epoch maker, one who could sow the seeds for the next generation from the fruits of the previous one. Mahatma Gandhi is the most powerful visionary and a practical idealist from the first half of the last century, whose life is a role model for all of us. But the effort has to begin from a point where you are standing. That is what made all Mahatma Gandhi's idealist actions practical, and he can be truly called a man of action. But it does not only mean that he was busy. He was rather busy, but what we mean is the action of putting ideas or beliefs into practice more than anything else, was the driving force in his life. The answer for Mahatma Gandhi was always found in action. He had said, "An ounce of practice is worth more than tons of preaching." But if you want to understand Gandhiji, you will have to understand him not only with the intellect, but also from the emotional part of you and from his acts, from his life. Usually, people see him from different perspectives. Some people will think of Gandhiji mostly as a political leader, but there are some who may think of him as a saint. There are others who think of him as the environmentalist, and some think of Gandhiji as a nation builder. He may be all this, but I think when we consider Gandhiji, we have to find out what is the common stream in all these different aspects that you see in his personality. One was the commitment to value, and the second one was efficiency in the kind of work that he did. This is part of his comprehensiveness, and there was a unique mixture of, for example, enthusiasm on one hand and patience on the other. Mahatma Gandhi has made significant and seminal contributions that span across disciplines such as economics, spirituality, conflict resolution, international peace, civil rights, education, politics, and much more. At that time, the most harmful and destructive impact on the world was that of imperialism, modern industrialization, violence, war, materialism, and the greed for controlling the world. Mahatma Gandhi advised to shun these seven social sins in his speech on October 22nd, 1925. Politics without principle, wealth without work, commerce without ethics, knowledge without character, pleasure without conscience, science without morality, worship without sacrifice. In my opinion, Mahatma Gandhi's life left the most powerful and strong imprint on the humanity of the world. He had said, "My life is my message." Reginald Arthur Reynolds, the British writer, a Quaker, and an anti colonial activist, lived in Gandhiji's Sabarmati ashram in India from 1929 to 1931. Reynolds was impressed by Gandhiji's vitality, his vision, honesty, tactical and strategic abilities, his charm, his sense of humor, his logical and analytical mind, yet capable of real affection, and the scorching passion for truth. I will play another Gandhi Katha Dhun in Hindi about Gandhiji's philosophy of truth, non-violence, purity of means that
लागी रे लगन लागी रे लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन लागी रे लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा सत्य अहिंसा से सत्याग्रह सीखा सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन सर्व प्रकार के भय का मोचन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन लागी लगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन सत्य अहिंसा में मन मेरा मगन
Time magazine had listed out three most important protests over 190 years. The first one was the Boston Tea Party. The second one was the Dandi March. And the third one was the March of Washington. We can see a common thread. The first and second were against the same company, the East India Company. And there was a common thread of non-violence in all the three. In 1930, with a pinch of salt, Mahatma Gandhi shook the world. He started out on 12th March from his Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad for the sea coast at Dandi with 79 fellow marchers. Walked for 24 days, walking 10 miles a day. Stopped at 48 villages, covering 241 miles till he reached Dandi on 5th of April. On 6th April, when he picked up a fistful of muddy lump of earth with salt, 100,000 people joined him, and towards the end of the year, 300,000 people broke the salt law all over India. 1,362 newspapers covered the news worldwide. So he remains the most powerful global brand ambassador of peace and nonviolence, a youth icon, an apostle of peace and nonviolence, a man whose values can make the world a better place today. In 1904, in South Africa, after reading John Ruskin's book Unto This Last, Barrister Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi completely transformed his life overnight and started leading a community life of self-control, voluntary poverty, bread labor, and sarvodaya or welfare of all. He established 4 ashrams in his lifetime, 2 in South Africa, called Phoenix Settlement in 1904 and Tolstoy Farm in 1910. He established 2 ashrams in India, Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in Gujarat in 1917 and the Sevagram Ashram in 1936 in Wardha in Maharashtra, where Kasturba Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi, along with the ashram inmates, lived in poverty like the common villagers of India. Ashram life was his ideal of a non-violent face-to-face society for Sarvodaya, the welfare of all, and carrying out constructive programs, which is his second gift to humanity, the first being Satyagraha. I am happy to inform you that I was born in his last ashram in Sevagram. My father was inspired by Gandhiji since his childhood and joined the non-violent freedom struggle in India and lived in the Sevagram ashram. Even after Gandhiji passed on in 1948, for more than 5 decades, my parents and all of us have continued to walk on the path that Gandhiji has shown to humanity. So, what I'm telling you all today is based on what my parents have told me, my own understanding and experience of Gandhiji, who has inspired generations of people who have followed his path and continue to do so even today. The life and thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi are intertwined and inseparable. His politics was imbued with his spiritual experiments, and his spirituality was tempered by his vision of a non-violent society, and his constructive work was integral to his politics. The unique practices of Mahatma Gandhi, his control of palate, his fasts, his spinning, his silence, and his prayers were as much a part of the politics as of his spiritual life. These practices and experiments were sustained and nurtured by the inmates of the ashrams that he had founded. The ashram community, through its own practices, affirmed, modified, and validated Mahatma Gandhi's ideals and practices and continues to do so even till today. This shows the relevance of his practices. Our friend and the British Quaker, Sir Horace Alexander, called Gandhiji the slave of watch, as the bell used to ring in the ashram 56 times during the day. He said, and I quote, Gandhi had wonderful courtesy and punctuality. I was to learn quickly that he was the slave of watch. He had more to do in every 24 hours than almost any other man. So he had learnt how to pack the most into every minute. Yet he never gave the impression of being hurried and impatient. So Gandhiji carried out all his experiments in nature cure, health and wellness, diet control, hydrotherapy, sun bath, mud packs, and observing silence for a whole day in the ashram. Gandhiji has given three gifts to humanity, and that is Satyagraha, constructive programs, and Ekadasha Vrata or the 11 observances. These are a set of rules for the ashram inmates for spiritual progress and voluntary self control. Along with that, it was also to make ordinary men and women into extraordinary seekers to take part in the satyagrahas. Gandhiji's ashram had a mingling of political and spiritual aims. It was a practical laboratory, as I said, for transforming ordinary men and women into extraordinary satyagrahis, for offering the highest sacrifice in the freedom struggle on one hand, and to get involved in constructive programs to serve the poorest of the poor, to establish their self respect and dignity. Of course, the other reason was to get them ready from bottom up for taking part in the freedom struggle. Ashrams were his ideals of a non-violent face-to-face society for Sarvodaya, welfare of all, Swavalamban, self-reliance, Swachhata, cleanliness, Seva, service of humanity, for realizing his vision of Gram Swaraj or village republic. Ivan Illich, the Croatian Austrian philosopher, had come to Sevagram Ashram in 1978 and he sat in Bapu Kuti. Gandhiji's cottage used to be called Bapu Kuti for a long time. And he said, and I quote, this heart of Mahatma Gandhi demonstrates to the world how the dignity of the common man can be brought up. It is also a symbol of happiness which we can derive from practicing the principles of simplicity, service, and truthfulness. I will present the Gandhi Katha Dhun, which explains Gandhiji's philosophy of truth is God.
आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, सत्य ही है परमेश्वर बापू का बोल, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, उसी परमेश्वर की नित्य कर तू शोध, आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, आँखें पवित्र राख सत्य ही तू बोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल, ईश्वर साक्षात होंगे अंतर टटोल.
So Gandhiji's role and contribution to the political arena are well known. What is less known is his contribution towards health and wellness. Gandhiji was a firm believer in the principle that a healthy mind keeps the body healthy, and he stressed on the importance of a healthy lifestyle and positive thinking. His interest in health, hygiene, nutrition, and diseases was as great as his interest in politics. He insisted that adopting preventive measures for diseases was much better than treatment. He also said that it was important to focus on cleanliness, a controlled diet, and an exercise regimen, and that it was best to avoid overconsumption of medicines, especially those that were not required. He was a firm believer in nature cure and conducted experiments related to diet and fasting. He always believed that it was important to understand what caused diseases and then remove that very cause rather than falling ill again and then attempting to treat it with excessive medicine. Gandhiji was essentially a man of science. He approached problems in a scientific manner. Mahatma Gandhi's message to the world on the vital question of health and well being is very important. To him, the study of this question was part of the service to God and His creation, which was his mission. Knowing to care summed up Gandhiji's life. His message was simple and easy to follow. It encouraged everyone to respect simplicity, voluntary self control, reduce the wants, follow the tradition, cultural practices, and the values, follow the environmental credo, and treat oneself through nature cure for living in harmony with nature. There is a very nice Vedic expression from the ancient civilization of India which says, as is the atom, so is the universe. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the universal body, so is the cosmic body. As is the universal mind, so is the cosmic mind. Yoga and meditation integrates all components of health, and Gandhiji was a strong believer in naturopathy, Ayurveda, and Ashtanga Yoga. His experiments with nature cure were always on himself. Then he also advised his friends and disciples to follow these remedies and treated and cured 30,000 patients through nature cure. Gandhiji was the first environmentalist, and with his stunning premonition and knowledge, he had declared that the earth has enough for man's needs, but not for man's greed. Greed will be the main reason for the environmental degradation and the ecological crisis he had predicted almost 100 years ago. Further, he had said, the earth, the air, the land, and the water are not an inheritance from our forefathers, but on loan from our children. So we have to hand it over to them as it was handed over to us. Last year on 2nd October, United Nations released this stamp brought out by the UN Postal Department with the above quote. Very few people know that as a couple, Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi, his wife, contributed immensely 123 years ago to public health emergency and selfless service of humanity during the Second Anglo-Boer War from 1899 to 1902 and in the Zulu uprising of 1906. He established the Natal Indian Ambulance Corps, and along with free Indians and Indian indentured labor, he served as stretcher bearers by carrying the grievously injured, wounded prisoners of war. In the bubonic plague outbreak in Johannesburg in 1904, He and Kasturba Gandhi not only rushed to help them, but quarantined the patients in an empty godown which they had thoroughly cleaned and sanitized, and treated them through nature cure. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi, along with all the ashram inmates and their children, returned to India in 1915. There was a outbreak of the Spanish influenza pandemic in 1918. Gandhiji opened up his Sabarmati ashram as a quarantine center and treated and served patients through nature cure, provided simple vegetarian diet to boost immunity and maintained physical distancing. Gandhiji and Kasturba Gandhi took care of the families of the patients, looked after their physical, mental, and spiritual needs, gave them correct information, did prayers and meditation along with them, and taught them for taking care of each other during the time of the Spanish influenza pandemic. On November 10th, 1918, Gandhiji said that our ancestors could build such tough bodies in the past, but today we are reduced to a state of miserable weakness and are easily infected by noxious germs moving about in the air. There is one and only one really effective way by which we can save ourselves from them even in our present broken state of health. That way is the way of self restraint or and of imposing limits on our acts, desires, and wants. In as early as in 1906, Gandhiji used to write articles in his Indian Opinion newspaper in South Africa about diet and nature cure. Later on in 1942, in August, Gandhiji wrote the book Key to Health, and he wrote in the preface that this book was translated into several Indian languages. An English translation also appeared. This reached the West and was translated in several European languages. The result was that the book became the most popular of all his writings. So he said, may perhaps the reason for the popularity is to be sought in the fact that I have looked upon the problem of health from a novel point of view, somewhat different from the orthodox methods adopted by doctors and Vaidyas, the traditional health practitioners. Mahatma Gandhi wrote that anyone who observes the rules of health mentioned in this book will find that he has got in it a real key to unlock the gates leading him to health. He will not need to knock at the doors of doctors or Vaidyas from day to day. Today, the world is facing three kinds of crisis globally. First is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is causing immense physical stress, sickness, fear of death, deaths, and existential crisis. The second is the serious and long drawn financial crisis, which is also causing physical and mental anguish. And the third is the ecological crisis, which is impacting everyone. We have to look for answers somewhere within ourselves by learning from the life of Mahatma Gandhi, who had said, my life is my message. The lesson the pandemic is teaching us is simple. When one member of the family falls sick, the entire family is affected, and soon the community is affected, the nation is affected, and then other communities in other nations also get affected in this globalized world. The well being of one individual has an impact on people on the other side of the globe. This is true of every action of ours. What we eat, what we buy, what we think, and what we do has reverberations and repercussions on all life on earth. It is this anubandha, this interconnectedness that sustains all life on earth. We are all in this together as one human family. Whether we choose to see it or not, we are living on the same planet Earth. We have only one home, our Mother Earth. We are intimately interconnected and interdependent on each other. The current COVID 19 pandemic is a wake up call for every country, big or small, rich or poor, developed or developing. It has opened our eyes to the fragility of the existence of humans. We will have to learn to live with COVID 19 now and in the future as well. Instead of reinventing a new lifestyle, we just have to get inspired from the life of Mahatma Gandhi to make the necessary changes in thought and actions and conduct for coping up physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And this is the future that the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic is pointing out to us if we observe carefully. Many lessons are very clear, and some are still unknown, surrounding us in uncertainty. This uncertainty is causing mental stress, anxiety, existential crisis, fear of extinction and death, and the mass psychology of living in depression and grief is pointing out towards the fact in the current pandemic. We are collectively grieving for our loss of our known lifestyle. Our ancient sages and seers in India have always looked upon us as Vishwamanava, the global citizen, and said that the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. If we still return to the normal standard of finding happiness by chasing after money, wealth, power, position through lifelong consumerism, then COVID 19 has given us a good shake up and the wake up call. This kind of lifestyle of empty consumerism and mass distractions has only increased the difference between the rich and the poor, created the huge carbon footprint, increased the misery of the invisible poor masses. When a crisis makes you feel stressed, meditation, prayer, and chanting of Ramanama relieves the stress response. Fear and anxiety are forms of stress that become exaggerated when events become uncertain and when you feel a loss of control over the situation. And when the stress keeps repeating itself without let up, the thinking mind reacts to all these conditions. It always has, even in normal times. But a crisis brings stress into high relief, making it very capable of lowering the immune system of our body and causing inflammatory diseases. Decades ago, stress was classified as epidemic of modern life. The Gandhian way of life is the best guide to practicing the coping mechanism that induces relaxation, calmness, inner peace, absence of anxiety, and remaining positive. He comes out as the greatest healer and the wellness guru who comes free of cost during and after the coronavirus COVID 19 pandemic. Gandhian principles of freedom from fear and care for all is a perfect prescription in the times of COVID 19. Gandhiji emphasized on healthy lifestyle, empowerment of self-care, and care in the community would make perfect sense, he had said. I will end today's Gandhi Katha with the Sanskrit peace benediction for the universal welfare. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let all be happy. Let all be healthy. Let all experience auspiciousness. Let no one be overwhelmed by grief. Om Peace, peace, peace. I once again take this opportunity to thank the Indian mission for hosting the Gandhi Katha. My special thanks are to all of you who have joined me online and have given me the most precious gift, and that is the gift of your time. With Gandhiji's blessings, who had said that peace is the only positive force which will lead us from darkness towards light, I will end with the Gandhi Katha hymn Shubha Mangal Ho. May there be auspicious good, may there be good, may the earth be auspicious, may the sky be auspicious, may every particle on earth be auspicious.
शुभ मंगल मंगल